welcome again to everybody to this auspicious evening in memory of the birth of Lahiri Mahashaya, who as I was meditating, I was thinking of the time that has passed since his birth. At 1828, he was born in Bengal, and here it is 194 years later, and it seems that obviously the outward circumstances of this world and people's lives have changed drastically in those last almost 200 years, but yet inwardly this situation for all of us pretty much remains the same. We're all still, century after century, we're still seeking truth. We're still trying to overcome the dilemma of these incarnations. How do we overcome suffering? And Lahiri Mahashaya played a very significant part. I termed him a yoga avatar because he was instrumental in ushering in a new age of spirituality, not just into India. His was a world mission, ushering in a message of Kriya Yoga, a message of practical application of spirituality into everyday life, and the science, of course, of Kriya Yoga as taught to him by Mahavatar Babaji. And Lahiri Mahashaya was born in Bengal, but he spent most of his life in Benares in those days, Varanasi now. And you can still go visit his home there. Pilgrimage, it's open on Guru Purnima at that time to take darshan of his presence, of past presence in that house. But he grew up uh, and lived, you might say, a normal, quote unquote, normal life by worldly standards. Became an accountant and worked for the military and different functions in that capacity. And uh, you could say that in some sense his life was veiled to that higher potential of within himself, and of course his past incarnations of who he was, and uh, the greatness of the soul that he came in, because he was said to, as we say, he was an avatar, but yet for a divine purpose, you might say his early life was veiled, the past was veiled to him. Paramahansa Yogananda did say that in past lifetimes, Lahiri Mahashaya was uh, had been born as was he was a reincarnation of King Janaka and also of the great mystic poet Kabir. But you can see, particularly in that incarnation, Janaka, a great soul, a great saint, but yet also a worldly king with the worldly duties, bringing balance to both the spiritual side of life and the worldly side of life, fulfilling one's duties in life. And so he embodied that as a king of yoga, you could say, in this lifetime, that lifetime as Lahiri. And you could say that his past was veiled to him for a divine purpose. He had, because it was, you might say, veiled from him by his guru, he grew up to take, and he took on worldly responsibilities. He was married, had two children, two boys. But at the age of 33, something very significant happened in his life, and he was called through, you might say, divine manipulation by his guru to be drawn up and called up into the Himalayas, to be transferred up into the neighborhood of Ranikhet, where the story goes, he eventually, in the wandering in the hills above the city, he met his guru, Babaji. And Babaji at that time revealed to him, touched him, you might say. In that touching, he opened his eyes. Oh, don't you remember this spot, this cave, this place we are up in that cave, up in the mountains there? And he remembered everything from the past. And he had been called by Babaji to be initiated into the science and the techniques of Kriya Yoga for a divine purpose, because Lahiri had been born to carry and awaken, or you could say maybe reawaken, better stated, to reawaken the science of yoga in the modern age of Dwapara Yuga into which we have entered. The world, the solar system itself had entered at this time. And that, as it has been explained, every age has its own particular sadhana to be able to find freedom, the individual soul, for society as a whole. Of course, these things are never lost, like Kriya science, never lost completely, but as it was explained to him by Babaji, it had been lost to the general population because of general priestly secrecy and mankind's indifference. But yet, that awakening was about to happen, and Lahiri was chosen as the emissary to reawaken these teachings of yoga in the world and to spread them in the world. And he would spread them as a householder. Now, I think it's not really correct, I don't think, to say that some people say, "Oh, he was a householder yogi." Well, literally, that's true, but I don't think it's the right way to say it. I think he was a yogi who happened to be a householder. And this was an important message that he had come in to awaken people to become yogis. Be thou a yogi, O Arjuna, as Krishna says. And here he says, we say, be thou a yogi, whether you are an accountant, whether you are a housewife, whether you're a school teacher, a student, or whether you're a renunciate in the Himalayas. Be thou a yogi. And then what you have to do, whatever that dharma is that you must fulfill, do that, but do it as a yogi. And Lahiri Mahashaya was not in favor, actually. He set an example in this. We was not in favor from people leaving whatever their worldly responsibilities. There's no necessity to leave one's world responsibilities in order to become a yogi. You can be a yogi in wherever you are, wherever God has placed you. As Gyanamata said, how do you expect to find God if you cannot do it where God has placed you in this lifetime? And taking that admonition of hers to heart, applying ourselves. And he was an example of that. And so he received Kriya Yoga, but there was a very important moment that, and for all of us, during that time of initiation up in the mountains with Babaji, where Babaji had initiated him. Lahiri had spent many, many days in samadhi bliss and eventually came out of that state and wanted very desperately to stay with his guru in the mountains, to forsake everything, his worldly life behind, and just stay with him. That the temptation was so great, the bliss was so great that he felt. But Babaji said, no, 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 no. Your job is to go back. You must now take what you have recalled. You see, it was not new to him. He just remembered. Take what you have remembered and take it back and share this. And Babaji told him to share those with those devotees who have renounced the world, renounced worldly ambition, and renounced worldly involvement in this material world. And Lahiri said, Babaji, Guruji, I have a request. And he requested, there are many souls, good souls, spiritual souls in the world, enmeshed in worldly duties in the world, that sincerely are seeking God. May I not also give this blessed technique to all those who are sincerely seeking? And Babaji answered, as you say, so let it be so. And with that, he was given the permission, you say, not just to give it to, as the tradition had been, to just, you might say, those few who had renounced everything outwardly, but yet give it to those who were sincerely seeking to be true renunciates, not just outwardly, but really the higher renunciate is those who are inwardly are willing to renounce ego, willing to renounce everything, attachments, desire, anger, all of those things. And so he was given that permission by Babaji, and he came back to Varanasi, and he lived his life there as an exemplary yogi, doing his duty still for many years until his retirement age, and he was only 33 at that time, doing his duty as reporting to the office, doing his job, but at night sitting in samadhi bliss. And from that house there, that home there in Varanasi, Benares, And a ray went out into the world to draw magnetically, because he didn't go, he stayed there. And he stayed there, but magnetically, souls were drawn to him. And it was from that house that the light of Kriya Yoga was destined to go out into the world to ultimately, through many, many great disciples who came to him. Of course, in our line here, Swami Shri Yukteswarji takes prominence, but yet he had many others as well. That Swami Pranabhananda, Ram Gopal Muzumdar, others as well, that spread this light. Keshavananda, Ananda, Kebalananda went out into the world to share this teaching of Kriya Yoga. To this day, many trace their lineage. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions perhaps, trace their lineage back to Lahiri Mahashaya and the example that he set of a king, a Raja Yogi, that King Janaka Nanda example of living both sides and setting an example in this age to come of Dwapara. Now, I was reading the autobiography of a yogi, a little bit about Lahiri Mahashaya, and there were a few sentences in there that I want to share and read about Lahiri, and and this is one. Unknown, Master writes, Yoganandaji writes, unknown to society in general, a great spiritual renaissance began to flow from the remote corner of Benares. And it reminded me that and we see now, almost 200 years later, the truth of that statement. During Lahiri's lifetime, he was not well known, but he had predicted that his life would be publicized or written about 50 years hence from that time. And sure enough, that prediction was fulfilled by Paramahansa Yogananda when he wrote his autobiography and published it in the late 1940s. But yet during Lahiri's time, he was not well known. But it demonstrates that a great teaching starts always as a seed, something small. And this is whether it's spiritual things or changes that happen in the world through individuals, or maybe perhaps a small group of individuals. Seeds are planted, and from those few, the ones and twos and threes or a dozen, eventually something new, something inspiring, something fit for the coming age that is about to come springs forth, and those seeds are planted. And in that culture, of that fertile culture in which those seeds are planted, they begin to grow and they catch on and they spread. And you saw this happen with the spread of Kriya Yoga and the teachings that Lahiri brought. But you see it also in many different ways. I know Swami Kriyananda used to say that, we would have no idea of the impact of these teachings, even in our own day, where we have seen the teachings of Kriya Yoga spread throughout the world, and it's just simply increasing, and it's more and more. And Master had predicted, Yogananda had predicted, that one day Kriya Yoga will become the religion of this new age, and not in the sense of a sectarian religion, or an organizational religion, but the teachings, the science of Kriya Yoga were destined to become the religion of this age in which we're living. And the essence of the science is because it is an attunement with the age in which we're entering. In other words, individual experience is going to be the element that will appeal and draw people to God. We're, could say, as a society, as cultures worldwide, just scripture alone, wonderful though it is not enough. Repeating something, ritual, outward observances, these things are very good, but they're not enough. We're in an age where, as individuals, we want to take to the next step. We're not going to be satisfied as souls until we know. And knowing comes from direct experience. And so if that's so, how do we gain that direct experience? And this is the function of Kriya Yoga as a technique. As it is said, the highest technique of self-effort in this age, and this whole idea of self-effort blended with the flow of grace. You see, both are needed. The divine flow, but yet the individual has to open oneself to be able to receive that divine flow. But from a small group, from a small individual, a small group of disciples, a world change can take place. And this happens in many ways. Swamiji would often say that this people will look back on this time in the latter part of the 20th century, first part of the 21st century, of the play of certain social forces that were going out at that time. And all of us as disciples play that role. And we take this example of our masters, and particularly the master of living a balanced life of deep meditation and outward service as exemplified by Lahiri Mahashaya as our guiding light in that effort. Now, that was my first quote that I noted as I was reading the autobiography, but then Master says the second one, referring to Lahiri Mahashaya, says, his uniqueness as a prophet, meaning Lahiri Mahashaya, lies in his practical stress on a definite method, Kriya, opening for the first time the doors of yoga freedom to all men. And you could say, as Master said, his life heralded a new approach to man's understanding of truth, one based upon direct perception rather than mere theological beliefs. And as I've said, find God where we are, not in wherever God has placed us. That's where our temple will be. That's where our altar upon which we worship, that which is right before us. You can find God wherever you are right now. No need to turn external circumstances. Lahiri would emphasize change within, practice Kriya, change within. And as we change within, the outer world will be conformed to that inner reality. The normal person thinks, well, if I want to attain something, if I want to do something, I have to go outside myself. I have to change external circumstances in order to attain that what I want. But Lahiri Mahashaya would use this phrase, solve every problem with Kriya Yoga. By that, what he meant is, as we practice Kriya Yoga, we change within. What do we change? We change our consciousness. We change our magnetism. And as we change inwardly, we find that the magnetic thoughts, the magnetic flow of energy that we exude into the world begins to magnetically attract to us that which is in conformance with it. And this, in this sense, you could say is epitomized by what Lahiri Mahashaya represented. His was, and Kriya is, the direct approach to God. In other words, we don't do something outwardly by changing circumstances, which, because of circumstances have changed, our consciousness is uplifted and our energy rises. That's an indirect approach because we're using an intermediary of circumstances. Lahiri's was the direct approach. In other words, go directly. Whenever consciousness is awakened in a broader form, what's happening is there's an inward, upward flow of life force in the spine. This is the yogic approach, the science of yoga, the science of pranayama that uplifts the energy. And this is if we can learn to uplift this energy directly through our own efforts, we do not need that indirect approach. And at any time we see the ability to be in joy, the ability to be in bliss, the ability to be happy, the ability to be fulfilled, the ability to be content in all circumstances is within our own self, to be chosen by us. we are in control, and we no longer are simply victims of outward circumstances, or victims, you could say, of karma. And through this, we overcome those karmic imperatives. And this is the highest science of yoga, the science of Kriya Yoga. Be able to find him, such an wherever we are. And such an attitude was that, and such an approach was that of Lahiri's. It was the key. The keys to the kingdom of the inner world are through the practice of Kriya. And allowing, as that happens, you'll see the outward world will change. And I think this is important for us individually, but I think in a larger context, which makes us realize and why Lahiri was considered an avatar, because an avatar comes, one, technically, an avatar is one who comes fully liberated into this world. And Lahiri did that. You might say, his path was veiled by Babaji's behest, but yet he came in without karma from the past, and he was liberated in past lifetimes, in other words. And when an avatar comes, they come not because of any imperative of their own, but to play a divine role, play a special role in God's will. And so he came for that. And they come also for a special role, not just for one or two or themselves, but they usually come typically to help uplift the whole world. And so this message of Kriya is for us as individuals, but collectively for all of us and for all of society, ushering in an approach to religion. Religion itself, spirituality itself, is being renewed through this emphasis on inner awakening, inner direct perception. Science, of course, wants to prove God intellectually through the mind, but as the scriptures say, God cannot be proved. It can be, though. God can be experienced, and we can have direct perception. We can prove it to ourselves. But you see, to try to then take that high divine insight and put it into words, we're trying to take, the ocean and put it in a small bottle, and that's not possible. But we can give others the ability to experience the ocean for themselves, not just to take our word for it. We can never explain what an orange or what a mango might taste like until that person has that experience directly for themselves. And so he came in with that message for us individually, but also for the world at large. And finally, the third quote that I saw in the autobiography is this: divine union, the yoga avatar proclaimed, is possible through self-effort and is not dependent on theological beliefs or on the arbitrary will of a cosmic dictator. And so consequently, I've covered a little bit of this already, but Lahiri did not advise, making outward changes. And if we find ourselves, whatever our Dharma has placed us, continue. And he was very ecumenical. He would say, whatever your outward religion, you don't need to change your outward religion, but do whatever your religion is with this inner. Take it inward. Do Kriya. If you're Muslim, you do, and many of his disciples were Muslim. Practice Islam, but do it with Kriya. If you're Hindu, the same. If you're Christian, do the same. Do whatever is your calling, but do it as a Kriya Yoga. And this brings me back why we should say he was not a householder yogi. He was a yogi who happened to do it who happened to be a householder. Be a yogi who happens to be a doctor. Be a yogi who happens to be an educator. Don't define yourself by your outward actions. It's by who and what you are. True religion and spirituality are not defined by outward form. And inwardly, there's no, I mean, there's no limits to what we can do. Don't be biased in that way. Each of us play our own role, but do it in a way that's uplifting to ourselves and uplifting to others. Now, this was, you could say, the central message of Lahiri's life. But in outward ways, or in other ways, he initiated very important changes that would set the stage for the future. In Lahiri's day, you know, the Bhagavad Gita is great scripture, known worldwide. That was not, and honored worldwide, obviously in India, but also universally outwardly in other countries as well. That wasn't the case in the 19th century, particularly in Lahiri's time. The Bhagavad Gita was known to some, but it was not widely known throughout the world for sure. But even in India, people in India think, oh yes, it's always been honored by everybody in India. That isn't really so. It was in the day 19th century, early half of 19th century, middle of 19th century, communication was not that great, and many things known to scholars perhaps, and known to priests perhaps, known to a few yogis perhaps. The Gita, as great as it is, was more of a historical scripture rather than the common guide that it is today to so many deep people. And Lahiri helped to reawaken the Gita, and that was one of the things he focused upon in his discourse, passed that message on to his disciples who did the same, especially Swami Sri Yukteswar. And it was Lahiri's gave a new interpretation to the Gita that was unique. He brought out the fact that it was a deep allegory, and in that it was a deep allegory to our own inner life. The characters, each of those characters, represent an inner quality that are within us. Anger, Kaurava is representing anger, greed, jealousy, all of those, the 100 sons, whereas the Pandavas representing the positive qualities. And that battle that's taking place within us is represented on that field of Kurukshetra, which is our own selves, and brought the ancient teachings in that modern form of that form of the scripture of the Bhagavad Gita, brought it alive and awakened it to now what you find. It's in every household has an awareness of the teachings of the Gita. He gave Kriya, he enjoined his students, spread Kriya far and wide. He himself stayed in Benares, but his disciples went far and wide to spread it into all lands. And he emphasized, we've come into this world for only one purpose, that is to find God. Now it's said, the Master said, Yogananda said that when Lahiri finally did pass, that when he died, he would go and he'd spend time with Babaji in the Himalayas and also Babaji in the cosmos. And he said, the Master said, Lahiri is still, as Babaji is reborn or is eternally living, so is Lahiri Mahashaya is living now with Babaji now in the Himalayas in physical form. And it would be good when you meditate to think of him as having that physical form and being there in a way. It makes it somehow very real to us. And it's an interesting thing that I've noticed, that over the years people have said, oh, that Babaji had appeared to them in one way or another. And many of the times that when he appeared, Lahiri Mahashaya is often with him, and that Lahiri accompanies him. And even in his lifetime, it was said that Lahiri Mahashaya, certainly as a younger man, or Babaji, because he retains a young form, seems to have an appearance even looking very similar to Lahiri Mahashaya. And you could say that Lahiri embodied that phrase in the Gita, the yogi is greater than those who discipline the body. The yogi is greater than those who follow the path of wisdom, greater than those who follow the paths of action. And he enjoined, as Krishna does to Arjuna, Arjuna, be thou a yogi. And so let us take these thoughts of Lahiri, take into meditation, meditate, bring that balance of living in the world, but not of the world. So God bless all of you. And I hope you, and keep that thought in mind today, especially this anniversary of the birthday of Lahiri Mahashaya.